How do you approach funding for startups? And what are some common challenges entrepreneurs face in this process? Because everybody tells us, oh, we can get that money. There's money out there. They are funding people. But it is tougher because we don't know better. But you have been on both sides. You have invested. You have also listened to a lot of people asking you to help them get investment. So you have a unique perspective. So what do you think, what is the best way you're going to advise those watching us right now, especially that young man who has a great idea, who is already struggling with his startup? What are the common challenges that they face, and how do they deal with this? Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is part of why I started F3. I think there are a couple of things we should put out there. Number one, I think a lot of founders fall into multiple categories. One category is founders that probably should not be raising money for the type of company that they're building, or founders who have not sufficiently hit milestones that they're ready for funding. I see that a lot, right? And typically that's just a mismatch between the type of business you're building and the type of capital. Every business needs capital, but not every business needs venture capital or angel investment. Some type of business makes sense for that, but there's so many others. I think right now we're tracking at F3 about 23 different sources of capital. There is crowdfunding, there is angel investment, there is credit cards, there is financing of what they call factoring. There's so many different types of funding. My point is, and oh, by the way, just sell to customers and make money by selling a product that people want to buy, right? So the point is mismatch of capital to the type of idea. That's one. Two, a lot of people are approaching VCs without thinking from their side of the table, right? So one of the things that's very helpful as a founder is to understand the person you're trying to pitch to. Number one, I tell people, just assume the person is greedy first before they are biased. Meaning, whenever you're pitching, there's three things, right? You can use logos, ethos, and pathos, right? You can use logic, you can use passion, right? And reasoning. And one of the challenges, I think, for a lot of founders is they think passion is going to get the other person excited. When you use logic that is just purely financial, if you were the other person on the other side of the table, would you give your money to this crazy idea from a person you've never met, that you don't know, who comes to you and says, I need $1 million for this thing that's unproven? Probably no. So you have to kind of break things down in a way that makes sense for people, that a greedy person would go, oh my goodness, of all the crazy ideas I'm hearing out there, this is the one I know I want to put my money in. And you have to make that case. And generally that means you don't get that money on day one. You don't get it on day two. You have to build a relationship to get to that money. That's two. Three, what I find is one of the challenges for founders is that you're approaching a market that is just not big enough, right? Or it's a market that the investor you're talking to just has no real interest. And the sooner you can either figure out if it's a market size problem or an interest problem, the better off you are. I always say to founders, the best thing, the only thing better than a no, than a yes, here's the check, is a fast no. The worst thing for a founder is to be sort of dating an investor that never materializes. So you want to figure out, is the market I'm going for big enough to get the type of returns I want, that an investor expects? And oh, by the way, am I building the type of business that makes sense for that thing? And if you can figure that out soon enough, you know what path to take. Another one is knowing the actual investor and what they are interested in. Most people try to get known and they put their information out there. But you as a founder have to figure out how to understand what that person likes to invest in and find out in what cycle they are in terms of capital deployment, right? So if the person is at the last stages of capital deployment, they're probably thinking of keeping that money for their sure bets. They want to double down. If they're very early, they might be more spray and play. Are you going to people that are professional angel investors or people who dabble part-time? I have a full-time job. I do it part-time. But I sort of sit somewhere maybe in between. You have people who, I have some friends who this is their full-time thing that they do all day long. That person is going to invest very differently than a person who is investing because they meet you and you're describing an industry that they know well, and they're like, you know what, I get it, I'm going to put money in, or they know you personally, right? So there are all these different challenges we see with founders, but I would say above all of them, the thing that I'm trying to tackle at F3 is to help founders realize three things. Number one, do your homework and your research. Have everything you need to do done fine. That gets you past hurdle number one. Hurdle number two is once you've done that, then target the right people. Hurdle number two. Then number three is basically a numbers game. You need to date 100, maybe 200 people to get to that number, right? And
wait, they need to date. I need to understand what that is. They need to date how many people?
Startup investing, like looking for capital in a startup is like the most promiscuous dating situation.
Don't let their pastors hear that too. You are telling them to date a lot of people.
You have to.
Don't let their pastors hear.
You have to be the most promiscuous, politician you can find. No matter what they ask you, you stay on message, you tell your story, you describe what you're trying to build, and recognize that even after you do all of that, some people just may not like you or your business, and that's fine. Just get a no quickly and move on to the next. I think if founders can do those three things, you're much better off. And then maybe let me mention one last thing, is I'm not convinced that every business needs capital today. Back to the AI stuff we've been talking about. I'm not convinced every business needs capital today the same way. I think any startup can be built for less than $1,000, depending on how you craft it. So if for $1,000 you can get off the ground, those first stages where you're begging people for money, just fund yourself and get to stage 2 where you've proven something material. And then that path to funding becomes a lot easier. I think more people should follow that direction.